Welcome back to the Magnum Rewatch podcast. My name is Graham.
And I'm Kathleen.
We are from LoadingReadyRun.com, where we do all manner of amusing stuff. But on this instance, we are here to welcome you to the world of Thomas Magnum, Private Investigator.
That's right. It's time for Magnum's Adventures in Hawaiian Stuff, which is actually very appropriate for this week's episode, The Curse of the King Kamehameha Club.
His quest into Hawaiian folklore?
Yeah.
Kind of?
Now, regular listeners will know that I have perhaps a very small, I would say almost non-existent level of tolerance for silliness, ghost stories, paranormal stuff. And I think I'm just going to have to accept that Magnum PI is going to have more than I want, because that kind of thing was actually a popular plot point for a lot of 1980s television.
I will give you that at least Magnum in this episode is skeptical.
Yes.
Like Magnum himself is skeptical. So that's an improvement over the remote viewing
Yes.
episode.
But, I mean, this is still dealing with, like, silly stuff, right?
Well, yeah, you'll see, I suppose.
You'll hear.
Let's just get to that. Yeah. We open with a shot of it's very rural. I want to say it's a Hawaiian hick town.
Yeah, this is not the nice part of Oahu. This is a crummy part of Oahu. This is a kind of a shacky looking place. It's not well kept.
They refer to this region in the episode as the North Shore.
The North Shore, I actually looked this up, is quite a nice part of Oahu because that is where all of the world-class sailing is. And in fact, if you want to go to the crummiest part of Oahu, if you're that kind of tourist, what you want to go to is the leeward side.
Leeward being which direction?
The leeward side is the west-hand side. Like when it's on sort of, like the North Shore is the north part of Oahu. If you bring up a map of Oahu and sort of follow along, it can make sense. That's where like sort of that tip is. But the leeward side is if you have Honolulu on sort of the bottom east side. The leeward side is following the bottom along to the west. And the leeward side has three sort of major sort of areas. And I apologize deeply for my pronunciation here. I've never been to Hawaii and I don't speak Hawaiian. Makana, Nanakuli, and Waneane. And it has a beautiful coastline, but a bad reputation. If you check the FBI crime statistics, you'll also find that there is higher crime here than other parts of Oahu. It's a little rundown. Houses are generally not as well cared for in this area. This is the place where there's the longest commute into Honolulu as well, basically.
Is that where you're going to see Dog the Bounty Hunter running around and chasing people for ice pipes?
I mean, very, very likely. My source, by the way, is Aloha Tony, Hawaiian realtor, who tells it like it is.
Thanks, Aloha Tony.
I figured a realtor's website would have the best information on where you want to live. So there you go.
Speaking of I don't speak Hawaiian, I just wanted to mention something that I said last week in a discussion that I had with someone on the forums. I referred to wahine as a colloquialism for woman in Hawaiian, and someone on the forums quite rightly corrected me that it just means woman in Hawaiian. It's not a colloquialism. And I realized that colloquialism was not the word I was looking for, but I wasn't sure what to refer to, what the term is for intentionally using a word in a different language for no reason. Because Moki and Magnum were speaking English in that scene, but for some reason Moki chose to say wahine rather than woman.
I mean, Moki's Hawaiian, though.
No, I know that, but people do that, right? They'll use a word from a different language. I don't know what the term for that
Everything
is.
is going according to Keikaku. Editor's note, Keikaku means plan. Like that, right?
Sure.
That's a
like
long-running anime trope on the internet for bad translation.
Anywho, none of this will help the language that we hear in the scene, which is not Hawaiian that I'm aware of, and it's may not even be a language that is real.
I don't know.
I actually am not sure. But we go into this building, the camera goes into this building, and we see a man in front of a fire pit.
Inside, it seems very unsafe.
Yeah.
There's no, like, chimney hood or anything.
Sort of chanting, performing incantations, one could say. And then he picks up something and throws it into the fire, and you see that it's a patch. It's like a shoulder patch or something you would put, like, sew onto a bag from the King Kamehameha Club. And Kathleen and I are like, oh, that's weird. I wonder why. And then he throws on top of the patch a photograph of Rick, to which our response is, oh, that's bad.
Rick's getting cursed. So, I mean, obviously curses aren't real and all of that stuff. But, like I said, this is a paranormal style of episode. So, yeah.
We go from there to the King Kamehameha Club, where it's everyone's favorite time of day. It's a board meeting.
Well, I mean, Higgins seems to be enjoying it.
Higgins relishes these. You can tell. He loves these board meetings.
And you can see that, in fact, this patch that had been burned earlier is the same patch that Higgins and the other directors have sewn onto their the breast pockets of their King Kamehameha Club jackets. And may I point out that Higgins is like Robin's egg blue. It is like he's wearing like a blue jacket with a burgundy and yellow patch and like a brown shirt, and it's like, ugh.
Why is there a blackboard in this room?
Probably because they filmed it at a university campus.
Oh, maybe. Higgins starts talking about how he has placed a box for complaints in the lobby. He calls it his complaints corner.
Thanks, Higgins. Hey, actually, wait a second. Let's go back to that blackboard thing. Look, if years of filming Loading Ready Run videos have taught us anything, that it's perfectly normal to have a blackboard in a official business meeting setting, because we have, in fact, filmed many business meeting sketches in rooms at UVic. So we should not be questioning them. We should just take this as fact.
I like to think people give us a free pass.
Maybe were whiteboards invented by this point? Maybe whiteboards weren't invented yet.
Maybe.
I'll look that up. Anyhow, you continue.
Higgins goes into some of his complaints, one of them being that members of the club are complaining that other people are using their parking spaces. Cut to shot of Magnum parking the Ferrari in someone else's parking space. Members are complaining that people are not dressed appropriately for the club. Cut to shot of Magnum in a vest and baseball cap wandering through the dining room. People are complaining that there are spurious charges showing up on their accounts. Cut to Magnum and TC putting beers on Robin Masters' tab. It seems like really Higgins is just complaining about Magnum.
Okay, so whiteboards were in fact invented way back before this episode aired. There are currently two different accounts of the history of the whiteboard. Graham, the whiteboard is controversial. One from the UK and one from the US, but both date to the late 50s/early 60s. Anyhow, I will not get into the history of the whiteboard, but just so you know, whiteboards didn't actually really get popular until the mid-1990s. So they're commonplace to us because we, of course, remember seeing them in all university campuses and our elementary and high school rooms, but maybe back in the day they did need a chalkboard to take notes. So there you go.
I guess it all makes sense then. The other thing that Higgins has an issue with is the surf ski race. I'll get into what that is in a moment. The other board members are entertaining Higgins' complaints for a while, but they really want to get outside and actually see the heats for qualifying for the surf ski race, and they very quickly put up a motion and pass the motion to adjourn the meeting and go outside and have a drink.
It actually reassures me immensely that Higgins is a huge stick in the mud on the management committee.
To everyone.
To everyone. And everyone is just like, ugh, Higgins.
Like, even the other very serious-looking directors are like, this guy. A surf ski is sort of like a cross between a surfboard and a kayak. Like an inflated surfboard.
Yeah.
I've seen people do this on an actual surfboard, but I've never seen this unique item used for it. You sit on it and you use a kayak paddle, like double-ended paddle, to propel yourself through the water. And it's apparently called a surf ski, despite looking way more like a surfboard than a ski.
I feel that it's descended from the kayak genus of watercraft.
TC and Magnum, as seen in the cutaways from the previous scene, are sitting on the deck at the King Kamehameha Club, looking out at the people qualifying, particularly Henry Lewis, and commenting about how incredibly muscly and good-looking he is.
Well, to be fair, Henry Lewis is doing a handstand while they are looking at him, and then he starts doing push-ups while in the handstand. It's pretty nuts.
And actually, to further clarify, TC is commenting on how built this dude is. Magnum is just sort of like, well, I could win the surf ski race too. You and Rick are going to bet for me, right? To which TC, of course, laughs it off that there's no way that Magnum could ever beat Henry Lewis. Magnum says, no, I could beat him. TC gets his moment in the sun, looks at the camera, says, wanna bet, and leaves scene.
There is far too much looking at the camera in here. This is not the only look at the camera from this episode. I feel like they need to cut back on this, actually.
Rick and Higgins do not agree on the merits of this surf ski race. Higgins thinks it is bringing unwanted attention to the King Kamehameha Club. Rick, on the other hand, thinks that attention is probably what the club needs.
Yeah, there is some subtle hints in here that the club has perhaps not been as profitable in previous years as people would like it to be. And Rick says, hey, if we get attention and get new people in here, maybe they will become members of the club. And that will be good for us.
It's actually mentioned at several points through the episode that it is because of Rick that the club is doing as well as it is. That he is a skilled manager and has been keeping the club in the black when it was, teetering for many years beforehand. So they walk out into the lobby and a reporter accosts them. Reporter from Channel 9.
And Higgins is all annoyed, and he's just like, now we have TV crews in here. And Rick's like, yes, of course we have TV crews in here because they are here to cover the surf ski race because we have a bunch of people coming from all over the world. And the reporter's like, all right, who's the official spokesman? And
they both answer, I am. And she then asks, okay, well, how are things going for the race? And Higgins is like, and Rick's like, they're going great.
So Rick proceeds to answer her questions well and give, a polite interview. He's talking about how many people are there. There's people coming in from all over the world to the surf ski race. They've got almost 300 competitors. And then Higgins at every turn proceeds to correct Rick in the most pedantic way possible.
We've got 300 competitors, 297. The trip goes from Malachi to Oahu, which is about 30 miles.
Excuse me, it's 26.2 miles.
It's just constant. Higgins is being such a brat in this scene.
Yeah, he's being a complete shit.
But then the old man with the indoor fire pit from the opening scene shows up, walks right up to Higgins and Rick, continuing to speak in whatever language this is. He gesticulates at them, says some things, and then leaves. He does say King Kamehameha Club in the midst of this. And Moki
looks horrified.
Moki looks freaked out because apparently he's just cursed the King Kamehameha Club. He's a kahuna, and he's just rolled up and thrown curses all over the place.
It's like throwing shade, but so much worse.
Yeah.
But what's a kahuna? Well, Graham, I'm glad that you asked.
I did. In your voice, weirdly, how I could do that.
I mean, you'd be forgiven for thinking that we sound alike. So kahuna is a Hawaiian word, and it basically means priest, sorcerer, magician, wizard, minister, sort of expert. And kahunas are not any one set defined category of things. Some books list more than 40 types of kahuna. Some say there are more than 20. Anyhow, Hawaiian culture started getting revived in the 1970s after sort of being not necessarily repressed, but definitely disincentivized by sort of the white Christian settlers who had come to Hawaii. And so some Hawaiians sort of revived the kahuna tradition. So kahuna as a whole, like I said, isn't really a firm category, but it's could be divided into basically two basic types. There's craft kahuna, who might be expert canoe makers or, really good hunters or something like that. And then there's sorcerer kahunas, which are obviously what this guy is. And they're they can be healers or bad kahunas. Now, there's 10 categories of sorcerer kahuna listed on Wikipedia. I am not going to give you their Hawaiian names because I know I can't pronounce them properly. But just to give you some of them, there is a type of kahuna whose job it is to locate the site for temples. There's one who can send evil spirits to cause an illness, and perhaps this is what this one is. There's a type of kahuna that's an expert in studying the natural signs like clouds and rains and winds. There's even worse kahunas who can send a spirit, usually evil, to possess their victims. And there's even kahuna who would perform human sacrifices. But there are some who are just, their job is healing, right? So there you go.
The relevant one of note, I think, is the ana, who can pray someone to death.
Yeah, so kahuna sort of studies and traditional knowledge and stuff like that was never 100% firmly outlawed, but basically here's the history. You had a lot of Christian missionaries coming to Hawaii, and it's rumored that all of these practices were banned, but they weren't actually banned. They were legal until 1831, and then some of those practices were made illegal into in 1863, and then all of them were legal until 1887, and then some of them were made illegal again in 1919. However, since 1919, all of them have been legal, including sorcery, which was decriminalized in 1972.
Sorcery has been decriminalized in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Finally.
Interestingly enough, with a connection to the King Kamehameha Club, it was King Kamehameha V and his successor, King Kalakua, who invited the kahuna to come back to Honolulu to share their wisdom, sort of, get the traditional Hawaiian knowledge back circulating, say, it's okay for Hawaiian people to embrace our traditional beliefs and stuff like that. We can live alongside of the Christians here. And this made the Christian people so upset that in 1887 they forced something called the Bayonet Constitution upon him and stripped him of most of his authority. So I wouldn't say white people are completely blameless here, even if they didn't completely outlaw many of these practices. So anyhow, that's kahuna is basically traditional knowledge, shaman, medicine man, witch doctor. I'm trying to think of equivalents in other cultures that are perhaps more familiar to people.
How about a really good surfer?
It's not quite what's covered on that description, but...
But most people would probably be most familiar with this word in terms of the big kahuna.
I have heard that phrase before.
As in the guy or person in charge of a thing, or the one who is best at the thing.
That's the non-sorcery definition of kahuna, like best canoe maker, right?
Yeah. Well, that came into play from the 1950s sort of beach party movies, specifically Gidget. In 1959 was the one in which Cliff Robertson plays the big kahuna, a leader of a group of surfers. He's referred to in the movie as he's the big kahuna. And that genre of films that went on for about 10 years or so of surfer beach party movies popularized this term of the big kahuna as someone who's real good at surfing, and then just bled into everyday life as like, oh, that, you want to go talk to the person in charge of this small business, they're the big kahuna of that thing. And it's just a term that people use now infrequently, but that's where it comes from.
Wow, so what you're talking about is an early example of cultural appropriation.
It's not even that early. It's what white people have been doing for hundreds of years.
Okay, an example.
A comparatively recent example, yes.
Thanks, white people.
You're welcome. And speaking of white people, specifically very white Scandinavian-looking blonde people, Magnum is hurt that TC doesn't think he can beat Henry, so he goes to find Henry to challenge him to a ski surf race.
Henry laughs at him.
Actually laughs at him. Actually says, yeah, right, like a jerk. He's a good-looking dude, though.
Hey, he's okay.
With his sort of, like, almost white blonde hair.
Yeah, he spends a lot of time in the sun. He's, like, super tanned.
Mm-hmm. This is the actor's only acting role.
Really?
Yes.
He got a taste of the limelight in Magnum P.I. and didn't like it?
Robert Old is a practicing family doctor in Oxnard, California.
Oh, wow, okay.
You can find a picture of him on IMDb, and it's clearly the same guy.
Oh, wow. How does he look now? Have the years been kind to him?
They have, actually. I said IMDb, I meant Google image search. If you just search Robert Old, O-L-D-T, the first images is comparisons of him now in his practice to him in the episode of Magnum.
Really?
Yeah. Probably the most useless piece of trivia I have ever dispensed on this podcast. His reviews are middling.
Are they all like, man, he was great in that episode of Magnum, but he totally failed to diagnose my thyroid tumor?
No, it's just complaining about wait times. If you make an appointment, as I did, expect that the doctor will see you 2 hours later. I came and waited, and finally left without seeing Dr. Ole. He has some good reviews too, but a lot of people complaining about wait times at his practice.
I feel like he's a victim of his own success. That Magnum notoriety is too much.
Well, he dies now, so that's okay.
Yeah, Magnum
in the episode, and not in real life. I don't wish any ill will against Robert Old.
I'm sure he's a great physician.
But Henry Lewis dies now.
Yeah, so Magnum and Henry are doing this ski surf race, and Rick and TC are watching, and it actually looks like Magnum is getting ahead. And they're like, holy crap, no way. But then Henry just collapses, like face down on his board, and Magnum is like, oh crap, and Magnum has to then jump off his and then sort of like pull Henry's board into shore, get some help from Charlie, who also works at the King Kamehameha Club. It's a great shot. You basically see, like, his money shot is a long shot of his ass in some white swimming trunks, bright white swimming trunks to match his hair. as Magnum pulls him ashore.
As soon as they awkwardly 5-man handle this lifeless Adonis to shore, the reporter from Channel 9, Christine, she and her cameraman, they are right there. They are on top of it. And she's really just the worst kind of reporter. What's that? He's dead? Great. Get a close up.
Oh, she is awful. She's an awful lady.
And as we've said several times, he is in fact completely dead.
He has collapsed and died.
Higgins is even more unhappy about this because now someone's died at the King Kamehameha Club ski surf race. And the reporters were there the whole time to get the whole thing. And isn't that great for the club?
And Rick's like, that's not my frickin' fault.
Rick himself also looks a little concerned.
I mean, Rick is concerned because somebody has died, not because it's going to be bad publicity for the club.
True. Magnum, for his part, feels kind of responsible because he was racing the guy at the time and maybe pushed him to overexert himself? He's not really sure, but he feels kind of responsible, so he's going to drive over and talk to the coroner to see if he can get any information about how he died, because the dude just dropped dead. Just suddenly, boom.
Yeah, this is a different coroner than Magnum saw in the episode where he was tracking down the missing actress who had supposedly blown her brains out.
Yes. This coroner only appears in this episode.
Oh, I like this coroner. Do they just keep cycling the coroners out? How many coroners does Hawaii have?
Well, I believe the series has probably 5 or 6 over the course of it. But this coroner, named Coroner, is played by Herman Wiedemeyer, who is probably best known, actually is assuredly best known, for playing Detective Duke Lukela in 155 episodes of Hawaii Five-0.
People would have recognized him at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he's got a nice deadpan personality. Like, he's like, this strikes me as how a coroner probably would act in real life. Because when Magnum shows up at the coroner's office, the awful reporter lady, what's her name? Christine and her cameraman, Toady, are there. And she's just like, could he have been cursed to death? And the coroner is just like, well, I guess if he really believed in it, right? Like, he's so deadpan.
Yeah, coroner's like, look, I'm not ruling anything out, but I have nothing to tell you. It doesn't look like a heart attack. I'm working on it. Please go away. And she's really pushing this curse angle.
She's just the worst kind of, like, investigative journalist, you know, hoaxy, stupid. Like, okay, these shows are not on the TV anymore, but they're these shows that sort of ran in the late 90s, early 2000s called like investigative reports and stuff like that. They would report on malarkey and stuff like this.
Like hard copy?
Yeah, hard copy. She's that kind of reporter. I'm trying to think of a contemporary amalgam that other people might know a little bit more.
Anything Wolf Blitzer does?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of that stuff has just moved to filling...
To actual news, to 24-hour news cycles.
Well, yeah, to filling time on 24-hour news channels instead of being something that ran sort of early evening after the 6 o'clock news, right? If there's any crackpot talking at about 4 a.m. on CNN, this is that kind of journalist.
Or primetime on CNN, who knows? Magnum rolls up and tells the reporter to lay off the coroner because he's just doing his job. She recognizes him from the club and starts asking him questions, and he says, no, I'm not a doctor, I'm a private investigator. She says, oh, are you here on official business? And then we cut to a shot of Magnum on the television having been filmed from the reporter's camera as he turns to the reporter's camera and says, well, yes, as the official investigator and spokesman for the King Kamehameha Club, I can say that we have no comment at this time. And Higgins turns off the TV in disgust.
And looks at Magnum, and he is so mad. And Magnum's like, what? I had to say something.
A very minor detail in this scene that I like is that Rick says, well, I did hire him. Like, Rick tells Higgins that he did hire Magnum to be the official investigator for what happened here. But we know from Magnum's narration that that was not why he went to the coroner. Mm-hmm. So Rick is just covering for Magnum. It doesn't make Higgins any less upset, though.
I mean, it makes sense that if you have somebody who can be a private investigator, that you'd try to figure out what the heck happened that somebody would suddenly drop dead. Magnum is probably uniquely qualified to find out if this guy actually had, you know, a really bad drug habit and abused a lot of cocaine on the weekends and had a weak heart or something like that. So, you know, the King Kamehameha Club would know that they were not liable for his death and therefore could not be sued for his death. Like, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Rick does start getting a little antsy about this whole curse thing. And Higgins does too, but not necessarily. It's hard to get a read on whether or not Higgins is buying the curse or if he's just generally upset with Rick, who is definitely buying the curse thing.
Yeah, Rick is super into this curse idea, and I think Higgins is actually just more annoyed that this is really bad publicity for the King Kamehameha Club.
Magnum's trying to figure out who could possibly benefit from making the club go under.
Yeah, Magnum's the only person talking a lot of sense in this scene, honestly.
And he figures it's got to be whoever owns the land, because Rick says that it can't be someone looking to buy them out from the land because they have a 45-year lease, which is insane. And as Higgin points out, they only have that lease if they can continue paying it.
Yeah, so Magnum very quickly deduces, all right, if there's somebody who wants to get their hands on this land, perhaps to sell it or to build something else, then the easiest way to do that is not to wait for the King Kamehameha Club's lease to come up for renewal, but to get them kicked off the lease because they can no longer meet the terms of paying their monthly rent.
And they've already had some members ask to leave after the recent sort of kerfuffle.
So even Higgins at this point is like, oh, that's actually a super good idea. And what I like about this is Magnum back to using his investigative skills and like thinking, logically about why somebody would want to curse the club, and not in the last couple of episodes where he goes to Rick and is like, Rick, find me a clue, comes back later, a clue is delivered. Like, Rick has been used as a bit of a MacGuffin in the past couple episodes, which is starting to annoy me, and he is not in this episode. Magnum does real investigating.
Mm-hmm. But then the fire alarm goes off, and they rush to the kitchen, and there's a grease fire on the stove.
Executive Chef Chen is like,
One chef trying to put it out. There's no one else in the kitchen because everyone else called in sick.
The King Kamehameha Club has a lot of like native Hawaiians working there, and I think that they're all spooked by the curse.
Yeah, that's the implication anyway. Higgins gets even more upset and threatens to fire Rick, who then says, you can't do that if you can't fire me if I quit first, and maybe I'll just do that. And Higgins just stares at him for a second and then leaves.
Because he realizes he doesn't actually want to fire Rick.
Doesn't actually want to fire Rick, and also that would be terrible for business because Rick is actually really good at his job. But Rick does start getting pretty heated and references the pilot episode for the first time, saying that he should have kept Rick's club.
Yeah,
because
Rick's
it was
Club
a cool
Americano.
Place. Yeah, Rick's Americana, the place with, Sam, the guy playing piano, that everything was Casablanca. And
it was great.
Magnum's like, that place wasn't that great.
Magnum says, that place was a bust.
Yeah.
And he's like, it went out of business, Rick. I mean, maybe.
So this is the first time
pretty busy in the pilot episode, but maybe everybody was just there to buy and sell cocaine.
This is the first time that we learn what happened.
Yeah.
Because the pilot episode, Rick's Americana, whatever, is doing fine. And then the first episode of the series proper, Rick is managing the King Kamehameha Club. And it's actually never explained.
I thought they just retconned that out because Rick's Cafe Americano was stupid and that Humphrey Bogart angle was stupid. And the cafe was gross looking.
Yeah.
It was a hedonism palace.
It doesn't sound so bad when you put it like that.
It's like the opposite of a place I want to go to.
Magnum continues to use his investigative skills and goes and talks to Moki because Moki knew that it was a kahuna and that he was cursing the club. So he goes and talks to Moki. Moki's freaked out.
Yeah, Moki doesn't want to give Magnum any information. But then Charlie, another Hawaiian who's also working at the club, comes up and says, oh no, you can find that guy on the North Shore. This is his name.
His name is Manu.
Manu, yeah, you can find Manu up on the North Shore.
Moki says he wouldn't tell him because he's scared because the kahunas have power. And Charlie tells Magnum the kahuna doesn't have power over Magnum.
Kind of interestingly.
Not quite sure what the implication is there.
Graham and I both made a note in our notes at this point.
And that is the last we see of Moki.
Moki is further referred to as Sir not appearing in this episode.
No, that's the last we see of Moki ever.
What?
The character is no longer in the series after this episode.
What? I thought he had a good thing going. He'd been in like almost every episode.
I know. I don't know why. There's no reason that I can find for
Maybe he quit
why.
because he was scared by the curse.
I guess.
Maybe he pissed off Donald P. Belisario in real life.
But that's probably much worse than a curse, actually.
Oh, yeah.
He would go on to play Punk number 1 in an episode of Jake and the Fat Man.
Poor Moki.
Yeah.
Does Charlie come back?
He does not.
Wow.
Charlie, by the way, played by Manu Tupo, best known for his role in the Richard Harris film A Man Called Horse.
That classic.
Where he plays a Native American chief.
I was going to say a horse.
Well, no, he plays a Native American chief called Yellow Hand.
Oh.
The plot, if you're curious,
mildly,
to A Man Called Horse.
Is there a man named Horse?
There's a man called Running Deer.
That's not even remotely close to a horse.
In 1825, an English aristocrat is captured by Indians, it says here. He lives with them and begins to understand and accept their lifestyles. Eventually, he is accepted as part of the tribe and becomes their leader.
Oh, God. It's like Dances with Wolves. And what was that terrible Tom Cruise movie that just went off the rails? The Last Samurai?
Yeah.
Oh, it's basically one of those stories. White person is accepted and learns everything about this incredible culture really quickly because white people are better, and then becomes their leader because white people are the best. Love those movies. They're the best.
Well, in Magnum, white people are apparently immune to kahunas. So Magnum goes to try and find him.
Well, he takes TC with him for muscle.
He does. We open this next scene on the shot of the cane fields burning.
Which is something they do after they harvest sugarcane.
Mm-hmm. And TC is reading a book called The Kahuna.
Yeah, this is before you check Wikipedia. He's got TC reading the book to him as he drives.
By Likiki R. McBride.
Is this a real book?
It's a real book.
Oh, wow. Nice
written-
job, Magnum Props Department.
It was written in 1972.
Looks like you can buy it yourself
You sure can.
for $9.95 on Amazon.
If you really want it. It gives you such amazing advice as, according to legend, the only way to know for sure if someone is a kahuna is by the presence of a ruby flash detectable in the eyes.
That comes up a lot.
So, does it? No.
Well, it might. We've never met a kahuna as far as we know.
That's true. TC thinks this book is hilarious until he realizes that Magnum is taking him to meet a kahuna and then starts getting a little weirded out by it.
TC seems cautiously sensible for the most part.
Well, TC gets to the part where a kahuna can praise someone to death and starts freaking out about that.
I mean, that's fair.
So they roll up to,
Like a small general store on a dirt road.
in what we assume is the leeward side of the island.
Yeah, it's a very rural, underdeveloped side. Like, all you see in the background is sugarcane fields.
Magnum parks the Ferrari beside the only woman for 18 miles
She's really pretty.
and starts sort of like, hey, how's it going? I have a question for you. TC distracts him. He turns around. And when Magnum turns back around to the girl, a very large Hawaiian gentleman is now standing between Magnum and the girl. And there's another large Hawaiian gentleman on TC's side of the car.
Yeah, there's like 8 large Hawaiian dudes that have just appeared.
There's a lot of big guys.
And so Magnum looks at this large Hawaiian dude who's suddenly appeared and says, "Hi, I want to ask you a question," in the exact same tone of voice with the exact same smile. So that's kind of funny.
I do like that. And then he and TC just start getting into an argument. TC just starts yelling at him about what a terrible idea this is, and Magnum defends himself, and they get into this back and forth argument. And eventually, the Hawaiians are so sick of them arguing that they're just like, look, no, Makua, he's up the road. His name is Makua. I think I said Maku earlier. It's Makua, pardon me.
Yeah. I feel like these people didn't really actually mean them any menace. Like, TC assumed they were going to get into a scrap, but I think they were just interested as to why this white guy with a big Ferrari has suddenly pulled up in the middle of nowhere looking for some old dude.
And they find the old dude. They find Makua, the house that we see in the intro, and he's inside, still making incantations over the fire pit. Magnum and TC just sort of roll in, and their interrogation doesn't really go well because they just sort of talk at him, and
He ignores them.
he doesn't say anything.
He continues to chant.
Gets up, sort of keeps mumbling like daughters past them.
TC yells at Magnum some more, and then Makua uses this opportunity to make a run for it and bolts out the side door.
Yeah, he stops doing the incantations and just breaks out into a dead sprint. He was basically just sort of like old man past them.
Yeah. And so they're like, "Oh, shit." And so they chase him right into the burning cane field.
This, by the way, is this gentleman's only acting role as well.
Wow.
This is Sol Bright. Not an actor, but a very well-known Hawaiian musician.
Oh, neat.
Active since at least the 30s for sort of Hawaiian, I don't want to say Hawaiian pop music.
But with like a traditional Hawaiian twist.
Yeah, but with ukuleles and done by all Hawaiians. You want to hear a bit?
Yeah, let's listen.
Okay.
Having a heat wave, we're having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave, a tropical heat wave. The temperature's rising, it isn't surprising, she certainly can. She started the heat wave, she started a heat wave, but letting her heat wave, but letting her heat wave, and in such a way that the customers say that she certainly can. Gee, her anatomy made the mercury jump to 93. Yes, sir, we're having a heat wave, we're having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave, a tropical heat wave. The way that she moved that thermometer proves that she certainly can.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that was Sol K. Bright and his Hollywayans Heatwave from 1935. And now he's running into a cane field being chased by Tom Selleck and Roger E. Mosley.
While it's on fire.
Yeah, sure is.
And so Magnum and TC run into this burning cane field, and they split up to try and find him, and they cannot find him.
At least 10% of this cane field is stock footage.
Yes.
But the rest of it is actual, some sort of location shoot with real fire.
Yeah, no, this is a stunt scene. And there's some nice, like, run-along shots that there is just a cameraman running and holding a camera.
They lose track of Makua and try to just get out of it because they're getting smoke in their eyes and it's hot. They get out of the cane field.
Or no, they don't get out of the cane field. Someone set a backfire behind them.
Right. Sorry, I forgot about that. Very relevant piece of information. Makua is crafty. So they get out, and who's waiting on the road but Christine from Channel 9 and her cameraman?
How the hell did she get up here?
She's following the same leads as Magnum is. She's just trying to do her job.
Suspicious that she seems to be at every corner that Magnum turns.
And making Magnum part of the story more so than he would like.
Well, Magnum's pretty much on tilt because TC actually kind of like falls over while they're like running out of the field. And he's like, get that camera out of my face. He's like, TC, are you okay? Is your arm okay? Do you need to go to the hospital or something like that? Magnum is legitimately concerned for TC's well-being and does not care about being interviewed.
She tries to ask TC a question of, and how are you involved in all of this? To which he replies reluctantly. Magnum then unplugs the microphone, pushes the camera away, and says, look, you can cover the fire, cover the club or whatever. Leave me out of this. I am not part of this story. And then it cuts to the news report where she's like, oh, the curse at the Kamehameha Club. You know, there's an investigative reporter out here chased a man into a cane sugar cane field.
She says Magnum chased a guy into a cane field where he died.
They show them pulling his body out of the cane field.
And Magnum is like, I did not do that. He was running away.
He ran into the cane fields.
I was trying to get him out.
We followed him. We did not chase him in there.
All very irritating.
This is during a scene back in Rick's office at the Kamehameha Club where Rick and TC and Higgins are all stressed out and wound up about this curse, and Rick isn't feeling well and he thinks he's got a fever, and Higgins is jittery and TC is legitimately weirded out by the whole thing, and Magnum has to just scream at them. He has to like yell sense into them.
Yeah, he's like, for goodness sakes, curses aren't real, basically.
Remote
viewing. Whew, geez, that's undisputed science. But curses, that's just, non-white person malarkey.
He says, who owns the land? I need to go talk to him. Finds out who owns the land, rocks on up to his house. That's the next scene. Magnum rolls up to this guy's house. His maid answers the door, says that he doesn't take visitors, so Magnum will have to be quick. He's just about to take his pills. She has a beer also. And Magnum's like, he takes his heart pills with beer? And she says, no, it's water in the can. He just likes to think that it's beer. So anyway, go on in and talk to him because the dude's senile. But he's a little sharper than you think.
Yeah, he seems senile, but not super senile, because as soon as his maid disappears, he pulls out 2 beers.
2 real beers.
Yeah.
He offers Magnum some beer, and Magnum's like, no, it's okay, but thank you for offering. And he says, no, it's not water. This is real beer. And Magnum's like, oh, well, in that case, sure.
Yeah. Magnum, hydrate through beer.
And then drive. Why not?
It was a different time.
The man, Sidney Dollinger, says that he loves Hawaii and specifically loves the Kamehameha Club, which is why he leases the land to the club for such a cheap amount, specifically $2,000 a month, which seems very low.
I mean, okay, that's more than I pay a month in rent.
Yeah.
35 years later or whatever.
Yeah, you're not an exclusive club.
Yeah, I don't have beachfront property in downtown Honolulu.
Yeah.
They do say that under different lease terms that land would go for $40,000 or $50,000 a month, even in 1980.
Which is why he mentions his daughter wants the land.
And Magnum's like,
Uh-huh.
Everything comes together.
But he just wants the King Kamehameha Club to stay the way it is because he's proud of it, and he wants it to be a club that everyone who made Hawaii great can enjoy. The Hawaiians and the Japanese and the Howleys. And Kathleen, what is a Howley?
Well, I had to look this up because I was like, what?
No kidding.
It's spelled Haole.
Oh, that's not how I thought.
Yeah, but pronounced Howley. It's a term used in Hawaii to refer to individuals of European ancestry, in contrast to those of native Hawaiian ancestry or Japanese people. So basically, Haole is a Hawaiian term for the white folk.
Oh.
So the Hawaiians, the Japanese people, and all the white folk who work together to make Honolulu and Hawaii what it is.
Nice.
Basically, this guy used to be a big landowner, and he sold off most of his land, but he lets the King Kamehameha Club go on like a cheap lease so they can have memberships that are within a reasonable grasp of the average working Hawaiian, basically.
Nice. And he loves it so much he starts crying. Magnum's trying to get information out of him, like, hey, where is your daughter? What's her name? Where can I find her? And he just sort of slips back into daughteriness and doesn't give Magnum any information and just sort of stops responding. So Magnum's like, all right, fine, goodbye, and takes off. On his way out, he says to the maid, hey, can you help me get in touch with his daughter? The maid's like, his daughter's been dead for like 15 years.
And you're like, oh, he is senile, but not... oh, damn it. F.
Yeah.
Piss. So we're back to square one with no leads. And at this point, I'm like, I could have sworn that the big reveal would be that awful Christine, the character name I have decided for her, would be his daughter.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty obvious too, but no, apparently not.
Yeah, so womp womp. Back to square one.
Back to the King Kamehameha Club. Rick is even worse than before. He's like confident he has a fever, actual aches and pains. He's feeling really lethargic. And Magnum's like, there's got to be someone with something to gain from this. This can't just all be random, and it certainly isn't a curse. Who could benefit from this?
Yeah, he thinks Rick is making this up because he's so stressed out. Also, there's nobody at the King Kamehameha Club at this point.
And there's nobody at the beach except Charlie,
who's going for a swim.
So Magnum's like, oh, that's interesting. So he goes out and he talks to Charlie. He's like, hey, Charlie, how's it going? He's like, oh, nice. Had a good swim. And there's no one around here today. This is really cool. Magnum's like, oh, yeah. Do you like it when there's no one around? Is that something you're into? And he's like, yeah, I like when people are here too, though. That's also nice. And he starts talking about the kahuna. And Charlie says, I said that he would have no power over you, but everyone has someone who has power over them. Right on cue, Higgins enters scene. With bad news. Rick has collapsed. There's an ambulance on the way, and he's being taken to Honolulu General.
And to his credit, Magnum is like, holy F, okay, see you later, Charlie, bye, Higgins, and like sprints off to see if Rick's okay.
And to his credit, Higgins seems very contrite and is like, I didn't think he was actually sick.
I mean, neither did Magnum.
No, but, Higgins is like, once again, the window into the actual heart beneath the cold veneer of Higgins.
So they're bringing Rick into Honolulu General, which I believe is shot at a different hospital than we saw Honolulu General in Never Again, Never Again, because it looks completely different. This looks like a hospital. That looked like a walk-in medical clinic in that episode.
That is true. It did look
it could just be in different areas, but maybe they got clearance to shoot in the actual emergency part or something.
Yeah.
But anyhow, and who is there? It's that awful Christine.
She's already there, which is amazing.
How?
I don't know.
Did she know?
But they take Rick inside. They're running some tests on him. Magnum and TC are waiting outside. Magnum
telling that awful Christine to piss off, basically.
Yeah. So he calls the coroner. And he's like, look, is there anything about Henry that you can tell me now? Because Rick just collapsed in the same way. Anything at all. The coroner's like, well, there was a potassium deficiency. And he's like, could that kill him? I'm like, well, maybe if it was combined with this and this. And
but I mean, anything's possible. It's a very, like I said, this is a very sort of deadpan coroner. Like, sure, why not, Well,
my favorite bit of deadpan thing is Magnum goes like, thanks, Doc, you're a lifesaver, and hangs up the phone. And the coroner's like, lifesaver? I'm a coroner.
Yeah, corner humor.
Yeah.
So anyhow, Magnum yells at the doctor who just admitted Rick, check him for a potassium deficiency. And she's like, why? And he's like, just do it. And she's like, fine.
Takes off back to Sidney Dollinger's house and says, I swear, if there's potassium supplements in his bedstand.
Well, no, here's the deal. The coroner does tell Magnum, I mean, if you took a lot of diuretics or something like that, that would bleed potassium from your system. And so Magnum is like, well, hold on. Sidney Dollinger takes pills every day. If he's taking diuretics, I think I know who the culprit is, and maybe this was all just an act. So he zooms up there, yells at poor senile Sidney Dollinger, who is like not together with it, unlike the last time Magnum talked to him. And you're like, Magnum, you're barking up a tree. But Magnum is pissed off because Rick is sick and like really worried.
And I and you had the same sort of read on him that he's, not as daughtery as he puts on. And Magnum thinks the same thing.
Yeah.
He's like, no, come on, drop the act, cut the crap. Obviously, you're more with it than you're pretending to be. And he does not drop it. He actually...
Well, I mean, that's the thing. When you really are senile, it's not like you're senile all the time. You can have periods of lucidity, right?
Yeah, but it turns out that that's the truth. Whereas we and Magnum thought the truth was that he's actually doing all right, but plays up the daughteriness for effect. But it turns out, no, he's actually...
pretty old.
Magnum's trying to find his daughter. The maid is like, your daughter is dead. You know this. And he's like, what are you talking about? My daughter's not dead. She's right there on TV reading the news. And the maid goes, no, that's your granddaughter.
And he's like, oh, it looks just like my daughter, huh? And of course, who is his granddaughter? That awful Christine!
There we go. We got there.
We got there. We were right.
I should cut in, actually, and say that Sidney Dollinger, played by Lou Ayres, who played the governor in the Hawaii Five-0 pilot, also has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and is best known for playing Dr. Kildare in the Dr. Kildare movies, of which there were 9
That's a franchise.
between 1938 and 1942.
Wow, good for him.
That's a lot of movies in a very small period of time. Anyway, I wanted to mention that.
So now we finally have all the pieces have come together. Magnum's like, that's why that reporter is always hanging around and is trying to play up this angle and is doing all this fear-mongering.
Because she put the kahuna up to cursing them, and she knew that she would be there in time to get it on camera. She put the whole thing together. So he goes outside and he's like, I'm going to find her.
But he doesn't have to look very far because she is there looking suspicious.
She's right there.
She's like, hey, do you want to go for a ride? And Magnum says, sure, step into my Ferrari. And she says, I would prefer to go in my own car. And as a lady, I would also prefer to go in my own car if I wanted to go for a ride with somebody, to be driving and not just get into a mysterious stranger's Ferrari.
Except in this universe, you're theoretically a murderer. So Magnum's like, okay. So they go over to the car, and before he gets in, he frisks her to make sure that she's not carrying a gun.
Or like a knife, and she's going to stab him.
And then they get into the car, and he checks the glove box for a gun, and he reaches into the back seat and looks through all the camera equipment for weapons, and he's like, okay, let's go. She starts by lighting a cigarette, and he says, is that the lighter you used to light that backfire that almost killed us? And she's like, yep. She's very candid at this point. She's just
she's
yeah,
very
sure
arrogant.
is.
Yeah, so
she's super arrogant.
Yeah, she's basically like, well, I was going to go take care of Makua, and then I thought I'd just tie up another loose end. Or no, she says, I'd rather kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And Magnum says, 3 birds, I had a friend with me. And she's just like, meh.
I want to point out, this is my only plot hole-ish issue with this episode, is that if she put Makua up to, hey, can you do this or whatever, he didn't have to actually do that bit in the first scene with the incantations and burning a photo of Rick.
I mean, he probably believes that he is a kahuna. I mean, he might have been a kahuna.
I guess.
Right? Like, and she might have paid him to actually do a curse.
Yeah.
Right? That might be just how he rolls.
Yeah. I figured because he was using the incantations to distract Magnum and Rick and then bolt into the cane fields that he didn't really even believe it that much. And if that's the case, then he could have just been like, yeah, sure, I'll curse him. I'll show up and say some things and take off. Instead of burning a photo of Rick. Sorry, I find that very strange. That awful Christine drives Magnum through the town.
And points out all the land that her family used to own and has gradually sold off over the years.
Land that was, and I quote, rightfully mine.
Oh, she's one of those people.
But she is not without generosity, and she is willing to cut Magnum in on this.
Sure she is.
As long as he, doesn't say anything to the police.
And Magnum's like, you tried to kill one of my best friends. No. Which is, I think, fair. She basically confirms Magnum's hypothesis that the King Kamehameha Club is paying a pittance for rent there because her grandfather is some senile old coot, basically, who wants to help the people of Hawaii and has never helped his own damn family, right? So if she can just push the King Kamehameha Club out, she's talking hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of dollars, right? And she's all like, I'm going to get my hands on this money. Yeah. And she says, I'll have my grandfather declared senile, and da-da-da. She's got this whole plan worked out.
And then she's just going to let him go. She drives him back to Dollinger's house and is just going to let Magnum go. And Magnum's like, you're just going to let me leave? And she's like, you have nothing on me. You have a bunch of circumstantial suspicions, and I have you being hugely involved in this whole curse thing, you've got absolutely nothing on
Yeah,
me.
she says she basically threatens Magnum. She's like, even if you try to do anything, I'll just make you look really bad on TV because I can. And she's been doing a pretty good job of that thus far, honestly, right?
Yeah. But then Magnum reaches into the back seat and presses stop on the camera that he hit record on when he reached into the back seat to check it for guns. He said, I don't think the picture's going to be very good, but the sound should come through okay.
Her face goes pale.
Yeah.
And so she does what any sensible person would do. She jams on the accelerator and tries to drive over a cliff.
Yeah, I don't know what her...
I mean, maybe she just wanted to kill Magnum.
I guess.
Destroy the camera.
Yeah.
That Magnum doesn't let that happen. He grabs her hand off the steering wheel, like wrenches it, and like knocks her foot off the accelerator, jams the brake, and then takes the keys out of the ignition.
And that's the end of that. I actually like how Magnum episodes are structured in that once it gets to a point where everything could feasibly work out, it just cuts to the and then everything was fine.
Yeah.
There's no like, and then she gets arrested, and then they talk about how she's going to trial, and there's no like in the end scene, there's no sort of like whatever happened to what's her name, like, oh well,
Yeah,
she had
this
this
is
sort
not Law and Order.
of... No.
That's for other people to worry about.
So what we go to is the ski surf race, because apparently everything's fine. People realize that the curse was bubkiss, that it was all because of Christine. Presumably that story got out to the public, and everyone's back in the ski surf race. And we get TC and Rick waiting at the finish line, cheering Magnum across the finish line as he places number 58.
Yeah.
58th.
Out of like 300's pretty good.
297. Rick, in fact, bet against him.
And so did TC.
Magnum's like, I saved your life. And Rick's like, yeah, well.
Yeah, I'm grateful, not stupid, I think is the
Yeah.
through line there.
And Charlie shows up to talk to Magnum and say hi and congratulations on 58th. It's still pretty good in a field of that number.
Yeah.
And still sort of talking kind of cryptically and, you know, or why did you say that Makua wasn't going to have power over me? And Charlie's just sort of like, oh, you know.
And I'm like, no, in my head this whole time. I'm like,
And
stop,
Charlie
back away.
looks at Magnum, and one of his eyes, with a really terrible special effect, glints red,
Oh, and then
ruby red,
Yes.
because
he is a kahuna.
He is a kahuna,
A more
a real
powerful-
kahuna,
A more powerful kahuna.
an actual mystical kahuna who has cheesy 1980s special effect in his eye.
Yeah. And then Magnum looks at the camera like, what the F? And the freeze frame.
Freeze frame to credits.
Yeah. So
This is my second least favorite episode so far.
here's the deal. I thought it was silly, and like this was a very predictable episode that was like not super complicated. I like that they made her the granddaughter instead of the daughter because it wasn't so obvious, but it was still pretty obvious what was going on. But
Yeah.
I have to ask you, does this episode sort of in general notch up the that's racist count?
Does it?
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. Like, I don't know. I'm not Hawaiian. I don't know if like the beliefs of the kahuna and stuff like that are being accurately represented. Like that they can do like that you could just hire someone to do evil curses, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, saying that all the Hawaiians in the episode participated in it actually means nothing. But you'd think they might have raised some sort of objection.
I mean, maybe, right? But I mean, as we talked about in the Scatman Crothers diversion in last episode, you know, some of the movies that he was in were kind of racist, but black actors were also just happy to be getting work, right?
That's true.
So you can never be sure of people's motivations, right? And so I don't know. Like portraying all of the Hawaiian people in this episode as sort of like
Freaked
mystical,
out by,
believing.
like, oh, the curse and the kahunas and that's all real and woo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. That's a little sort of, live and let die where all black people believe in voodoo.
Yeah, exactly. I don't
Yeah.
know. But it's hard. I can't personally make a judgment on this because I'm not Hawaiian,
No.
right? So that's where I have to leave it.
The red eye is offensive to me as a filmmaker because the special effect is so bad.
I mean, do you think they could have done better in 1980?
Probably. I don't know exactly how, but it's real bad looking.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's very sort of clumsily rotoscoped in post. I feel like perhaps they had a more subtle special effect in there, and then they were like, no, make it bigger.
They might not get it if it's not bigger.
Oh, I mean, they didn't need to put that in there. All they had to do was have him just look knowingly at Magnum and then Magnum to be like kind of freaked out, right?
I would have liked to have him look knowingly at Magnum and then teleport back to his home planet.
Yeah. Well, that's an even harder special effect, Graham. Jesus.
My work here is done.
Perhaps I am picking too many nits here.
That sounds like exactly what we're here to do.
But overall, I would actually say I like this episode a lot better than the remote viewing episode, which I don't know why. Perhaps it's just that I found
I think you like that Magnum isn't buying into it.
this one is more realistically written, even though it's not better written than that episode.
That's true. Yeah, that's fair.
Also, maybe I just find the subject matter of traditional Hawaiian beliefs a lot more interesting than
Oh, big time.
remote viewing, which is just garbage.
Next episode, I'm excited for, again, just by the name, Thicker Than Blood,
Ooh.
which is a lot of things, but it sounds like fun.
I mean, lots of things are thicker than blood. Corn oil, rocks, jello, lemon tarts. I mean, I could just go on.
Zeus and Apollo, who did not appear in this episode.
Oh, yeah. Robin's Nest wasn't in this episode at all.
There were no scenes at Robin's Nest in this entire episode.
Yeah, it was all about the Kamehameha Club.
Yeah.
I'm sad that Moki's gone.
Me too. I liked him.
I'm going to give this episode a 6.5.
I hope someone is keeping track of these ratings so that Kathleen can look at them later and go, oh, I was not consistent.
No, I'm certainly not consistent. Wait, what did I give the other one? Like a 4?
I cannot
I'm
remember.
pretty sure I gave the remote viewing one like a 4.
Cannot even begin to remember.
Well, if I didn't give it a 4, I'm retroactively 4ing it.
What if you give it a 3?
And then it may remain.
Okay, if it's higher than 4, it is now 4.
Yes.
All right.
This is how this works.
Sounds great. Hey, folks, we really appreciate you listening to our podcast. We're able to do it as a result of the kind support that you give us on our Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. It supports not only this podcast, but a bunch of others, including I want to give a shout out to Paul and his brother Dan and their new podcast, Fight the Future, where they review young adult fiction dystopian futures. Not the books or the movies or the characters or the stories, but the settings, the actual dystopian futures, and how viable they actually are. This is another Loading Ready Run podcast you can find on our website or in our main aggregate feed. It's called Fight the Future. I think you should check it out. And that is it for this week. Zeus, Apollo, take a week off.
All right, now we really do need to sign off. This has been like, what, this is episode 10? We don't have a proper sign-off joke?
Magnum Rewatch Podcast, The Eternal Quest for the Sign-Off.
I mean, we've got to nail this down by the second season. How many episodes are in this season?
Season 1 only had 18 episodes.
Oh, okay, we're more than halfway through and we don't have a sign-off. This is a disaster, Graham. Blinded by the red light. Poor special effects glinting from my eye. Blinded by the red light.
That's a sign-off that literally only works for this episode.
I'm working on it.
Okay. Workshop it. Bring it back next week. We'll see how it goes.